All right, good afternoon everybody. I'll begin with some more good news. We have no further positive COVID-19 cases in the community to report today. That's off the back of some very strong testing numbers over the last 48 hours. I want to start today with a reminder that while Auckland is at alert level 2 and the rest of New Zealand is now at alert level 1, Cabinet has also agreed to make the wearing of face coverings on public transport a requirement for all New Zealanders. Aucklanders have already been wearing face coverings on public transport since late last year. They have led the way in showing the rest of the country that it can be done easily and it can become a normal part of day-to-day life. I've seen all sorts of examples of creative face coverings. I commend people for the passion and the dedication that they have been showing in following these simple rules that are helping to keep everybody safe. So it's important that we all play our part to cover for each other. We'll review this decision and the requirements around face coverings at Cabinet on Monday alongside our consideration of alert levels. But for now, I want to remind all those who use public transport, including trains, ferries, buses and planes, to follow these guidelines for the benefits of public safety. The Cook Strait Ferry is an exception due to its size and the ability of people to maintain social distancing when they are on the ferries. In small passenger vehicles like Ubers, taxis and so on, drivers need to wear a face covering. While it's not mandatory for passengers to wear a face covering, we certainly encourage them to do so where practical. Another reminder too, we do rely on people to keep scanning QR codes. We've noted this before. New Zealanders are very good at responding to a COVID-19 incident in their QR code scanning. We've seen a spike in scans in the last 48 hours. We need to keep those numbers up. We need people to keep doing that. Being able to respond rapidly with contact tracing is an integral part of our system. The faster we can respond to new cases, the more information we have earlier on, the less likely we are to need to make further changes to alert levels. So everybody, please keep scanning QR codes. And to all businesses, the same reminder that we've been giving out all year continues to apply. Please make sure you're displaying your QR codes prominently. It was good to see them coming back out into prominence over the last couple of days. Please keep them there. Where necessary, replace them if they're looking a bit tattered and torn to make sure that people can scan them easily. I'm now going to hand over to the Director General, who will give you an update on today's numbers and the details of our case investigations. Then I'm going to give you a bit more of an update on the preparations for vaccine rollout, which will be beginning this weekend.
Thanks, Minister. Kia ora koutou katoa. So, as the Minister has said, the good news today is we've identified no further cases in the community, and there are 3 cases at the border in managed isolation facilities. No further cases being identified as tests are processed from the community does provide continued reassurance that the swift response of the system continues to be highly effective in response to the Auckland February cases. Some key updates then. The 3 cases we announced yesterday from the second family household group associated with Papatoetoe High School have now all been transferred to the Auckland quarantine facility. We will continue to update the locations of interest page on the Ministry of Health website if other locations of interest become apparent when we are aware of those. There are the 5 additional ones that were put up last evening, and on the website it is very clear about what people should do if they were at those places of interest at the time specified. For most of those sites, aside from the Westfield Manukau City Mall, if you were in those shops or the 2 takeaway places, McDonald's, Cavendish Drive and Subway Otara, then you need to stay home and get a test. The timing of that test is important, and the information on the website will tell you that, or Healthline will be able to tell you that. And if you have had been generally in the Westfield Manukau City Mall on the 14th of February between 1:30 and 3:30, it is simply a requirement to monitor your health for the next 14 days, and if you begin to feel unwell, to isolate immediately and seek a test. An update on contact tracing. As at 11:30 this morning, there were the total of 31 close contacts from the high school. All have returned a negative test, aside from the one new case yesterday, and that was case D. There are 1,490 casual plus contacts who are the other students and staff at the college. This is a slight drop from yesterday, as we have confirmed with some people that they were not at the school at the time that they may have been exposed. Of those 1,490, 1,398 have returned negative results, and there are 91 results still to come. Of those, we know that 75 people, we're still trying to just match up their record with the fact that they have had a test. This is sometimes a matter of, if someone doesn't have a National Health Index number, we need to do a manual cross-check on that. So those results will continue to come in through the day. As reported yesterday, case E is a worker at the McDonald's at Cavendish Drive. The short shift that the case worked at the restaurant has been thoroughly assessed for any exposure risk. Some staff who were working at the McDonald's restaurant at that time have been identified as close contacts. As such, they isolate for 14 days and are tested twice. Others are casual plus contacts. Anyone who visited the restaurant during the time that the case was working there, which was on the 13th of February, and with quite a lot of time before and after, between 11:30am and 4:15pm, you are considered to be low risk given the nature of the work that the case undertakes, and the advice there is to stay at home and get a test any time from today. Just a note of transmission of COVID-19 through food or food handling. It's important to note that food handlers are, of course, in any setting required to practice good hygiene and maintain good cleaning practices. I've asked my team to have a look at the evidence globally, and at this stage we're not aware of any cases of confirmed transmission through food or food packaging recorded globally, and this is of course a year on into the pandemic. Transmission of the virus through inanimate surfaces, known as fomites, is a very small possibility, but as noted, there are no documented cases of this. What we do know from research is that if it were to happen, very low temperatures and low humidity conditions, which are the ones that they sometimes are able to emulate inside the laboratory, would be required, and therefore that is not considered a risk in this situation where this person was working. Now, as part of our source investigation, we also have tested the staff at LSG Sky Chef. All 9 contacts in the the laundry workplace have returned negative PCR test results and negative serology tests. Of the 444 people in the wider working environment, and we have extended that to include all the contractors who bring the laundry to and from, or other products to and from, we've had 350 negative tests and 93 results are pending. A reminder that Papatoetoe High School will be closed until Monday, and anyone returning on Monday needs to have had a negative test result. People won't need a negative test result if they have already had one. You don't need another test, but testing will be available at the high school over the weekend for anyone who does need a test. All close contacts from the school, that is the ones who are the classmates of our initial case and staff who were involved in teaching that class, are in self-isolation till the 24th of February and are being supported by our public health colleagues in Auckland. They will need to return a second negative test before returning to school, which is standard for close contacts. Most importantly, of course, for this school, and indeed any school around the country, please do not attend school if you have any symptoms, but stay home, call Healthline and be tested. Now, I did speak yesterday of the responsiveness and spirit of the school community in responding to these cases, and I know the Minister has been in contact with the principal there, but I personally want to acknowledge the principal for Kuio for his strong support, reinforcement of the public health response, and I think a model leadership really of that college community. As I said yesterday, no one at the high school there invited COVID in, and Principal Kuio has provided his community with the reassurance they needed at a time of high and unexpected stress, so thank you very much. On to the source investigation. At this stage, all scenarios for possible infection sources are being thoroughly investigated simultaneously. So saying, the most likely source still remains transmission related to the airport environment where case B the mother works. ESR has been reviewing all B117 variants that they have processed over the last 2 months to see if there's any possible link to this new case. As part of that, one new line of inquiry is the 4 Points by Sheraton Managed Isolation Facility in Auckland, where there is a possible genomic similarity between a previous positive case from December, who's now recovered, and the current community cases. So guests and household contacts who were at that facility in late December have been contacted to either get a PCR or a serology test if they have had symptoms since leaving the facility. It's important to note that we currently consider this a very unlikely source of the infection at this stage, but we are leaving no stone unturned. Finally, on testing, more than 25,000 tests have been performed across Auckland since Sunday. And today community testing centres in Auckland are still reporting increased demand from their usual testing, with some queues at Otara, Wiri and the Botany testing sites. So if people are having to wait, please be patient, and there is good traffic and queue management in place. All the testing sites, if anyone needs a test, are on the Auckland Regional Public Health website, and of course testing is always available at most general practices and urgent care clinics and is free wherever you are tested. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Dr. Bloomfield. Before I get into a quick update on vaccines, I do want to echo the Director General's comments about the responsiveness of the school community at Papitauitau High School. Thank them for their positive response and perhaps convey publicly the thanks that I've given privately to Vaughan Quio, the principal of Papitauitau High School, who has been a model of leadership in his response to COVID-19. That is very much appreciated. So our vaccination program is well on track to begin the immunisation of the first of our 12,000 or so border workers this weekend. Yesterday we ran an end-to-end dry run of the process to make sure we're prepared for every potential scenario. That involved the teams in Auckland and Christchurch. Wellington are doing their dry run this week. Officials have been working on logistics for months, and the dry run gave them an opportunity to really stress test the system before it has to kick into gear. That it helps to identify any gaps and put in place any additional support that we need to in our plans for any event. There will be challenges in logistics with something that is as big as this. It is the biggest vaccination campaign in New Zealand's history. But the systems that we've set up for phase one for our border workers are robust and flexible, and the more that we do to test them to ensure that they're robust, the more that we will be prepared to scale up the system when we reach that point. So the dry run included a range of possible scenarios, including things from vaccines being dropped, something quite simple, through to the technology systems that are supporting them being unavailable for a period of time during the rollout. It included things like how to handle the arrival of a thermal protection box that's used to transport the vaccine, and how to validate a safe and secure handover of the vaccine between those who are delivering them and those who are administering them. So these tests, whether they be large or small, give us confidence that we can move into real-time vaccinations over the weekend. I want to acknowledge that the Defence Force have been intricately involved in supporting the logistics part of this process, and we've also had external expertise from Fonterra helping us to work through that process as well. The final steps in our preparations for border workers to receive their vaccines on Saturday and for the start of our overall program will include vaccinators who will be vaccinating our border workforce over the next 2 to 3 weeks, receiving the first of their vaccines. This will take place tomorrow on Friday. We have 100 vaccinators trained to immunise everybody who works at our border, and we have an additional 300 currently completing the necessary training to administer Pfizer vaccines. That's the workforce we'll be using in the first stage of our rollout as we prepare to scale up for a broader public rollout later on in the year. So we're on track to ensure that another layer of protection for New Zealanders, particularly those who are working hard at our border, another layer of protection is in place against COVID-19. We'll now open up for questions. Jessica.
Dr. Bloomfield, some people that we've spoken to today were surprised that the alert levels had moved. We haven't had that as much before. It's been very well signalled in the past. Do you think that you didn't do enough to prepare people for that possibility?
I think people will realise that we have been adjusting, improving and refining our systems right the way through our COVID-19 response. In the early phase of our response, we didn't have the contact tracing and the testing system operating at the level that it is now. People will have seen that we have been able to respond to other smaller scale outbreaks without the need to escalate alert levels. So once we had discounted the possibility, and I say this is somewhat from the Cabinet's decision-making perspective, once we discounted the possibility of widespread undetected community transmission, we then feel confident to move back to a reliance on our contact tracing and testing systems for the isolation of any new community cases that may flow from our existing cases. So the 3 extra cases that we saw yesterday, if we turned the clock back and said if we had seen those cases before we had moved to level 3 and level 2, would they have prompted an alert level escalation? And the answer to that is no, they wouldn't have, because we knew where the source of those was. We can then work very quickly to isolate those cases, to isolate their close contacts, to do testing, and to make sure that we're stamping out the virus without the need for alert level escalation. We do want to move to a point where we have to do a short, sharp lockdown for the purposes of ruling out community transmission, that we do that quickly, we do that efficiently, and we do try and get out of it again as quickly as we can. Now that is a difference, where previously we might have had a full incubation cycle, for example, before we have moved. In this case, the real test was, did we do enough testing in the right places to give us the confidence to move back down those alert levels? I'll let you follow that up and then I'll come to Toda.
On the flip side of that, what do you say to those who think you overreacted by putting Auckland into level 3 on Sunday?
Look, we worked through that very carefully on Sunday as to what the most appropriate response was, given the information that we knew at the time. I did not want to be standing here today and saying to you that we were now dealing with a larger scale outbreak in the community because we had moved too slowly on Sunday. So one of the things that when we sit around the table and make these decisions, and when the Cabinet makes these decisions, we are considering what we don't know as well as what we do know. And on Sunday, we simply did not have the information that we needed to discount the possibility that there could have been transmission that had gone undetected in the community. And we needed to move quickly in order to contain that in the event that that was what was happening. Toda.
Investigating whether mingling of staff at the canteen at LSG Sky Chefs could be linked to the initial outbreak.
I'll ask the Director General to comment on that.
Yes, we are investigating that, and that's why we have tested not just the co-workers in the laundry part, but all those working at that site, and indeed all the contractors who bring both laundry to and from and also the meals to and from. So we've extended that out widely. So far the testing hasn't turned anything up, but going back to my comment about the source investigation, the airport precinct seems the most likely route of infection of our original case, and we just need to get to the bottom of how she may have been exposed.
Do you think that some form of person-to-person interaction between the first known case and someone else is the most likely scenario?
Yes, that is the most likely scenario. So in the order of sort of likely ways that the virus is transmitted, person to person is highest on the list. Then, and we have increasingly seen what seems to be aerosol type transmission, and then fomite type transmission, as I said in my comments, opening comments, very, very much lower down the rank, and in fact no confirmed cases of fomite transmission globally to date.
But you've talked about a range of scenarios about what is, most of it actually seems unlikely. Is there a possibility that in the coming weeks and months we actually don't find out where the source is?
There is absolutely that possibility, and if you recall back to our Americold cool store investigations, we were not able in the end to conclusively decide what had happened there. What we often find we reach is a point where we can identify what we think might have happened, some likely scenarios, and then we can continue to look around whether there should be further strengthening of the system based on those scenarios. But we might not be able to get to a point where we say, actually, this is what we think is the most likely. What we needed to do over the last 72 hours through our level 3 period was do extensive community testing in and around the areas that we were concerned about to make sure that we were ruling out the potential for community transmission being the cause of these particular cases.
We'll
come over here.
Can I just ask you to explain in slightly more detail what you think the potential scenario was relating to the Sheraton?
Yes, I'd happily do that. And before I do that, you just reminded me some additional information we got in last evening, which was the whole genome sequencing information on the two new cases, the 12-year-old and 16-year-old that we reported yesterday. ESR phoned that through to me mid-evening last night, and that showed that though the genome for both that brother and sister are identical, and they are B117, and they are one step or one mutation away from the original student at Papatoetoe High School, so very consistent with the student case A infecting her classmate who then infected her brother. So that was reassuring, of course, and some very helpful additional information last evening. The 4 points at Sheraton is a situation where there is a B117 genome sequenced case from late December that is similar enough that it's worth us seeing if there's the possibility of an epidemiological link. Remembering it's 6 weeks or so down the track, so it's unlikely, but just whether there was a potential link from that case through one of the guests who may have left through to our cases that we found on the weekend. So that's why that's being investigated. Again, it seems very unlikely because of the time period and what would need to have happened to create that epidemiological link, while at the same time we were finding no other cases out in the community, which I think is important. And so that's why that is being pursued.
We'll come back to Tova.
During the August outbreak, contact tracing teams struggled to keep up and didn't have experienced staff. How are they coping this time around?
The feedback I've had has been pretty positive so far, but again, I'll ask the Director General if he's got a more recent on-the-ground update.
Look, I think over the last few cases that we have had, and the Minister talked about the community cases where we've had perhaps an MIQ worker become positive, and then we've had subsequent cases. Each time it has helped to continue to improve our contact tracing system. We stood up a lot of people over the weekend ready to support Auckland Regional Public Health. And I do want to just emphasise the value of having all our public health units and our national centre on a single database, so work can be allocated out right around the country to follow up cases and contacts as well. And so we're seeing that system continue to work very well as a national system.
Minister, you've said that testing and processing speed is limited by workforce, and in Parliament on Tuesday you said that one of our challenges we've got at the border is increasingly people don't want to work there. So firstly, why is that? And secondarily, probably more importantly, what is the government doing about it?
Look, one of the things that you'll see us doing about that is constant reinforcement of positive messages around our frontline border workers. I have been really concerned, and you heard both myself and the Prime Minister talk about this in the last couple of days, about some of the reports we have heard of how some of our border workers are being treated out in the community, how their families and whānau are being treated out in the community. That is having a significant impact on them. It is making them more reluctant to continue in those roles. Now, we're doing everything we can to wrap support around them to make sure that they know how valued they are, and they are our national heroes here in this fight against COVID-19, and we need them to keep doing the work that they're doing. But actually, the single greatest thing that we can all do is continue to reinforce the positive messages around our border workers. They go to great lengths to keep themselves, their families and the wider community safe from COVID-19, wearing PPE, being tested regularly. I spoke earlier in the week about flight crew, for example, people who are on the planes, who in some cases are being tested more than once in a 24-hour period because of the requirements internationally, depending on where they're going. And they're really taking one for the team there. We need them to keep doing what they're doing. So I am concerned when I hear reports from, and some of it comes through the media, where I hear reports of people saying that they're struggling to find enough people to fill their rosters, for example, because of reluctance to go and work in those environments. We can all do something about that, which is to just send our love to those workers and send our thanks to them. I'll let you finish that.
As their employers, why not pay them more or improve their conditions?
One of the things that we have done, which has created some discussion, is regularise their employment and give them more employment certainty. So when our response first stood up, they were often temp workers who were being paid a temp wage, so, a contractor wage. They didn't get annual leave, they didn't get sick leave, they didn't get all of the other things you get when you're a regular employee. What we have tried to do is bring them back in-house, so they are regular employees, which does mean their hourly rate goes down, but it means that they get all of the other protection that goes with being a regularised in a regularised employment. So they have employment certainty, they have a regular roster, they have sick leave, annual leave, and all of those other things that goes with that. Now, that meant that some of the people who were casual workers, who prefer to stay casual workers, exited that workforce because we were getting more regularised people in there. And so that has been a point of ongoing discussion, I think, amongst that workforce.
It's down to a simple question of if you're looking for employers or employees, pay them more will attract more. I mean, you've just said, yeah, cool, you're giving them annual leave options and things like that. But if you're looking for people to get on the front line for what is essentially a dangerous job, because in a pandemic, why not just simply pay them more money to attract more people?
The work that we're doing around the living wage, for example, and increasing the pay and conditions of people who are working at the border is ongoing. So if you think about our security workforce, one of the issues that we did have early on was that you had a casualised workforce there, some of whom were working multiple shifts, some in MIQ and some elsewhere, because the rates of pay were insufficient for them to be able to support their families on the pay they were getting. So we have brought them in-house, which means that we can pay them the living wage. I can say that all of our in-house employed security guards are now being paid the living wage. That is actually helping us with that problem. So we continue to look at how we can do that better, how we can make sure we're improving their terms and conditions of employment. Amelia.
But what if you factored in hazard pay, because they are putting themselves in harm's way by doing this job?
Look, we always look at how we can treat people better. We have to be fair. We have to consider the implications for the rest of our health workforce, bearing in mind that this is not the only high-risk part of our health system. There'll be people working in comparable roles, say in hospitals and so on, where they're also interacting with people who are unwell and who may have other infectious diseases who they're interacting with. And so we have to make sure that we are being fair to everybody, that we're treating people equitably. But again, I do want to reiterate that one of the pieces of feedback that I have had is that hesitancy amongst this workforce is in significant part driven by the degree of scrutiny that is applied to them and to their families. Henry.
But is part of the problem that you can't pay the nurses and MIQ more than the nurses in hospitals because they're on the same collective agreement? Is there a bargaining issue here, essentially?
Oh, look, they are certainly on the same collective agreement. That gives them some advantages, though, as I've mentioned. They get all of the protections that go with being on that collective agreement as well, which they wouldn't get if they were temporary workers and on a different collective agreement.
But you can't pay them more for being an MIQ, is like you're saying. You have to pay them what you pay.
We pay them what they would be paid under the terms and conditions of the collective agreement that they're on. And there are different levels of pay, depending on the work that they're doing, depending on their hours, depending on their experience and all of those things.
Minister, what can you tell us about progress on the work on the air filtration systems in the lifts in the Pullman?
So I can tell you that the Pullman has received its first couple of lots of people. They have moved into the Pullman for their 2-week stay and are well settled in there. I'm pleased to say that I got a report actually just this morning that the air filtration systems, which were due to be completed by the weekend, have now been completed. That gives us confidence again that extra layer of protection at the Pullman is in place now. It means that the changes to airflow that we were aiming to achieve in the Pullman have now been completed. We weren't expecting that to be done quite yet, but it has now been done, and very happy and relieved to see that completed.
You mentioned earlier that Fonterra's been helping out with these preparations for the vaccine rollout. What have they been helping with?
So Fonterra, of course, have great experience with logistics and with supply chains, and also with cold chain management as well. So we've been drawing on that expertise from the private sector to make sure that we are capturing any knowledge, wisdom and experience that they can share with us as we build that into our overall preparation for what will be a big logistical undertaking. When we're at the point where we're delivering thousands of vaccines around the country every day, we've got to make sure we get that right. But I'll ask Dr. Bloomfield to comment on that as well.
Just two things to add there, Minister. First, when I wrote to my company, or the Chief Executive of Fonterra, he did not hesitate to make people available really to come and help, provide assurance of and audit our logistics and supply chain. So that was fantastic. But he also said the second point is he would get other expertise from across the private sector that might be helpful, so act as a sort of a conduit into other expertise. So it's been great. And I might also point out that this has been done pro bono as part of NZ Inc.'s effort.
Just on masks, there was reports out in the US that some of their experts are encouraging their citizens to double up, essentially wear 2 masks to make it a little bit more healthier, essentially, over there. Is this the same? Would you have the same advice over here? Is that necessary at this stage?
Look, I would note that New Zealand's context is very, very different to the context that they have where they're in countries where they're dealing with widespread community transmission, which is not something that we have in New Zealand. So our face coverings policy, we're talking about face coverings rather than, surgical masks, for example, is a little bit different in that it's a very precautionary measure. So it fits in our abundance of caution, measures that we have in place. But I'll ask the Director General to comment on that as well.
I haven't seen the recommendation here, but so I'd need to have a look at it.
Right at the beginning, you talked about, I think you said a vaccine drop. Could you just tell us literally what that is? Is that, like, honestly just dropping vaccines?
If someone drops a package of vaccines on the floor, yeah, what happens?
Oh, okay, so it's not like out of a plane with a parachute.
No. So, look, one of the things that what we have to plan for in the rollout of our vaccines is that human beings are not 100% perfect. People make mistakes. If someone drops a package of vaccines when they're in the midst of the vaccine rollout, what would we do? How do we check that the vaccines are still safe to use? How do we get replacements to them quickly in the event that that's required? So all of those kind of just basic human elements are being worked through in the dry run. It's better to do that with empty boxes than it is with actual boxes of vaccines.
Have you had any projections of how many vaccines might be lost to sort of stuff-ups or anything like that, and you've built that into the system?
We do have a contingency built in there for wastage, bearing in mind too one of the areas of potential wastage is that these vaccines have a very short shelf life once they have come out of the deep freeze, if you like. So we have to prepare for the fact that there could be some. Big part of our logistical planning is to minimise as much as possible the potential for loss of vaccines because they reach the end of their shelf life before we were able to use them. But again, I'll ask the Director General to comment in more detail on that.
Yes, so the potential for wastage, as it were, is built into the ordering in the first place, but also built into our planning is a range of measures to minimise any potential wastage. So, for example, the moving of vaccine around the country will be done on a daily basis, really, and it will be provided to the venues who are delivering the vaccine on the basis that they have people already booked in, and so we know exactly how much vaccine to send. And also, we're planning to make sure they have, and I guess, people who are available at short notice, if towards the end of the day there are vaccines that are still available to be given, and that they can be brought in to be vaccinated at that point.
So of the 5 million, have you built in sort of like a percentage or an exact figure of how much you're prepared or expecting to be lost to wastage?
Yes, there was modelling done when the order was first put in, and I think this is for the ordering before we knew anything about the vaccine. Because the Pfizer vaccine has the super cold chain, it was a slightly bigger figure, and it was a 15% figure at that point in time. But of course now we have all the infrastructure in place to use this vaccine and knowledge about how to use it and have tested the cold chain. We would be looking to reduce that figure down.
We'll come to Tova and then Jessica.
Thank you. Can you tell us anything more about the person at the Sheraton? Where did they come from? Were they a returnee? Were they air crew? Have they been contacted and interviewed to find out if they've got any links to LSG, Sky Chefs, all this family? So
The only aspects of this case that I can recall is, and I don't recall where they came from, they were in the MI facility around Christmas time, and they tested positive on about day 3 of their stay, and then was moved to the quarantine facility. That's the only information I have.
Jessica.
Can I just get some clarification, Dr. Blimfield, about when someone is classified as someone who died with COVID-19 or of COVID-19, and then how we list them if they did die of COVID-19?
Yes, so what I can say is right from the start of the pandemic, we've been very inclusive in our approach to categorising deaths as COVID-19 related deaths. So you might recall when we had a number of deaths, sadly, last year related to aged residential care. A number of those people had not actually been swabbed because of the nature of their conditions, but they were categorised as probable cases because of their symptoms and the situation. However, we still included every single one of those in our overall death numbers. So the latest case we had was someone who had a confirmed COVID-19 infection, whilst they had a significant serious pre-existing illness, we have categorised the death as COVID-19 related, and you will see most countries doing this. For example, in the UK, they categorise anyone who dies within 28 days of being hospitalised for COVID-19 is automatically categorised as a COVID-19 related death.
All right, we'll take the last couple of questions because I'm aware that parliamentary question time is looming.
Dr. Bloomfield?
Sorry, Minister. Some community leaders in South Auckland are saying an extension of 48 hours to level 3 would help alleviate some of the stress and anxiety amongst the community they're currently observing. Would you agree with that?
Look, I do understand that any cases of COVID-19 cause a degree of anxiety within the community. I think that people can have confidence in the decision that we've taken because of the extensive level of testing that we have seen, the fact that we have been able to identify the close contacts and so on, and get testing and the track and trace system operating swiftly and effectively. I do acknowledge that this is newer in the sense that we've moved more quickly than we have done previously. That is by design, that is intentional. Where we do need to use a short, sharp shock, we want to do that as quickly and efficiently as possible and get back to something that's a bit more normal as quickly as we can. We have demonstrated that we can contain COVID-19 without the need to escalate alert levels. So we would only escalate alert levels where there was some additional factor that gave us an extra risk that we couldn't at that point quantify or control.
Dr. Bloomfield, sorry, was your recommendation to move Auckland from level 3 to 2 the only recommendation you made to Cabinet yesterday?
Yes, that was the recommendation of Auckland from level 3 to 2 and the rest of the country from 2 to 1. And the other part of that was for Auckland to remain at alert level 2 and to be reconsidered on Monday. And that was the advice that Cabinet took and decided upon.
Lucky last.
Dr. Bloomfield, the government is rolling out free period poverty products in schools. I just wonder from a public health perspective whether you consider this a good move.
I think it's fantastic.
Why is that?
Because we know that period poverty is an issue for some young women in our communities, teenage and young women, and we should be doing something about that, and I think it particularly is great for our lowest socioeconomic groups, more likely to be Māori and Pacifica young women, and so I just think it's a fantastic move.
All right.
On your swap,
All right, you can be very lucky
on
last
your
then.
swap from Coke Zero to kombucha, did Dr. Bloomfield's health advice have anything to do with that?
No, thank you.